Hey there. I had this really awesome session this morning, and I am not sure that I'm like supposed to share what I learned in it because it was like a think tank brainstorm type thing. I think that this is okay. So, one of the folks there is like a legacy media journalist person, right? He's like an icon, he's a really level headed guy. And he was saying that when he thinks about how to cover Trump, he thinks about it in three different buckets, and it was helpful to me, so I want to share it with you in case you're trying to like sort in your mind like the massive amount of information that's coming in about Trump all the time, because I think it helps us sort what he called the wildly important from the wildly trivial things. First up is all the things that Trump and MAGA do to push the bounds of legality and constitutionality. Okay. These are going to be things that come in and feel like breaking news, but are going to have a long tail before they could ever actually be accomplished. So it might be something like his executive order to end birthright citizenship, right? That was huge news. People got all worked up about it. And then it generated like truly no debate in the media, just lawsuits. And those lawsuits are very much on the side of the 14th Amendment, pretty explicitly saying that birthright citizenship cannot be taken away. So that's like one bucket of things, trying to not get yourself worked up about all the executive orders or potentially unconstitutional or illegal things that he does, and understanding that the tail line on stories like that is going to be much longer. It might be something that we hear he's done, but that takes several weeks or maybe even months before we know if it's going to be enacted, if it's even possible, or if it was never worth worrying about in the first place. The second bucket of things that Trump does are things that he does for the grift, stuff he does to enrich himself, his family, or his friends. So this bucket of news is for things he does like Trump comes out with a meme coin or an NFT or some sort of like a golden medallion or whatever the case may be. That is bordering on trivial news and potentially even propaganda. Stuff like Don Jr. going to Greenland was a stage PR thing to make it look very normal, like we were far along in negotiations for the United States to take Greenland. Stuff like him saying that he wants to put hotels in Gaza. We know that the Arab states are very against this, and it is highly unlikely that it will happen, but it is something that he would be doing in a grifty way, something where he is using foreign policy problems to try and enrich himself. And that's the way we should receive the information, and that's the way we should try to hold him accountable. Also realizing that some of the stuff he does that's grifty may actually result in good policy, not necessarily from him, but maybe from adversaries or from allies or even foreign countries that we're like only sort of cool with. Like, for example, him saying, I'm going to put hotels up in Gaza may prompt the Saudis to propose a better option than that. We don't know. And then the last thing he does is this destruction of institutions and replacement with undefined Trumpified systems. That's stuff like Doge, and also his threat to get rid of the Department of Education. Do you think those buckets make sense generally? And also on this bucket, the destruction of institutions, replacing them with a Trumpified system that's unproven. We did live an awful long time without a Department of Education. We can go back and look at what the world was like at that time. We can look at why we got a Department of Education and what removing it now from society would do in terms of harm. Because having those facts help people make better decisions, where Trump is just sort of a reactionary. He just throws things at the wall and sees what sticks. And he's using that talking point, well, the United States of America went 225 years without a Department of Education. What do they need one for now? Well, we can point to what they need for now. Society's needs and changes have changed. Another thing that Trump has done that falls under this destruction of institutions is banning the Associated Press from certain events, them not being able to cover certain events because they don't use language that he wants them to use. This is an attempt to attack the First Amendment, even if it sounds like it's for a silly reason. It's testing the waters. It's softening the ground for something like that. And the thing about it being the Associated Press that's so egregious is so many local and small news outlets use the Associated Press to inform their content. So this is for all the people who don't have the money or the clout or the legacy to put their own reporter in. You use the Associated Press. You use their photographers, their journalists, their reporters. They are nationally and internationally ranked as like the least bias. They are the boilerplate or the template for a lot of what other journalism comes out. So barring them in particular from having access to certain spaces where journalism is happening is not just getting rid of one outlet. It's actually getting rid of probably millions of outlets internationally and nationally, big and small. There are times that the Washington Post uses Associated Press reporting. There are times that Fox News uses Associated Press reporting or photos. It's a huge deal. I like the idea of kind of like bucketing the information that's coming in so that we can reach into one bucket at a time and try to examine what we're seeing without getting overwhelmed. Separate from how we bucket the information that's coming in from Trump was looking at history. And there was this lawyer who has been advising sort of like political history and journalism for like over 30 years. And she was saying that a lot of what's happening with Trump is a deja vu to what happened during the Nixon administration. And that makes sense because one of Nixon's biggest advisors was a guy named Roger Stone, who, of course, is a very good friend of Donald Trump. Nixon had an enemies list, the way that Trump's pick for FBI Director Kash Patel has an enemies list. Other presidents did things like pull press credentials. The Bush administration pulled press credentials and invested millions of dollars to drop in their own news reports that masqueraded as like genuine unbiased news, but it was from the Bush administration. Vice President Cheney once kicked the New York Times off of his plane, which at that time was like kind of unheard of because there's this idea of this thing called paper of record, and New York Times is one of them. And so to kick the paper of record for the nation off of the presidential or vice presidential plane was seen as this like egregious censorship of the press. The Bush administration also got that Patriot Act passed that allowed the government to spy on private citizens, and yes, allowed the government to spy on journalists. They all, I don't care who you are, all presidents have what they call friendlies, which are some news outlets that they'll invite in to do something that's going to be really friendly. That goes back to the history of time. So it really isn't a surprise that Trump has his sort of like favorites, or that we're seeing the Pentagon kick out legacy media organizations like NBC and the Washington Post in favor of like Breitbart or the Washington Examiner. The other thing that isn't a new idea but may feel new to us right now is the idea of what she called trash tort cases. And she says the 1990s were absolutely riddled with them. So in today's world, we hear that Elon Musk wants the journalists at 60 Minutes arrested for the way they reported on the freezing of funds to USAID. And in the 1990s, CBS was sued for the way they covered the dangers of big tobacco. Power structures have been chipping away at the First Amendment rights of journalists and a free press to tell the truth, threatening them with lawsuits that could bankrupt outlets simply because they don't like what that journalist has to say. Now, to this point, the Supreme Court has sided with journalism and sided with the First Amendment. Trump is going to test if this Supreme Court will similarly side with journalists or if they will side with Trump. And one of the other people that spoke, speaking of First Amendment rights and the rights to free speech, was this idea of tech bros and the fact that they believe that they have the right to speak, but they are not genuinely invested in everyone's right to speak. It was suggested that the media needs to rebrand as a public service because they've lost a lot of industry support and they've lost the support of the public, and they seem to know that. And a potentially easy win for media gaining some sort of credibility with the public again is the fact that the media cannot control speech. Because of the conglomeration of news organizations, it's not the newspaper that controls the speech anymore. It's the tech bros and the platforms that control the speech. It's the shareholders that control the speech. And that is something that I think we as the public in traditional media, new media, whoever you want to talk about, certainly recognizes is a problem and something that we need to fight back against. And the only way we can really fight back against that is by developing community with each other, rebuilding those bridges, finding things that we do trust in each other to put us against these huge power structures. But the thing that I took away from this morning's session was that we are not in a uniquely horrible experience, although we are in a really uncomfortable, weird time right now. That's undeniable. But when something bad happens, normally we think like, this is uniquely terrible. Nobody knows anything about what I'm feeling or how to get me out of this. And what I learned today is like, we do know. We do know, and we can build structures to sort of help us understand the world around us a little bit better, a little bit at a time. But I don't know. Tell me if you like this. I have like 16 pages of notes. So if you liked hearing about this, I can tell you a little bit more about some of the other stuff we talked about too. You let me know.